Thank you for coming on the podcast, Cory. It's great to see you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Caroline.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? I'm so excited about your program and your book. So I am going to jump on in, and because I want to talk about the abundant artist and I want to talk about your book, which I have here on my desk. I've been carrying it all around the house. How to sell your art online. And it's getting all dog-eared. And so the program itself, the Abundant Artist Program, exists to dispel the belief that artists have to rely on galleries, right, for success in the professional art world. You teach artists all about all of the other ways that they can make a living from their art. So please open up the show with background on who you are and how you came to be this guide for artists.
Sure. Yeah. So I started The Abundant Artist in 2009 as a way of exploring how I and other creatives that I knew could potentially make money from our creativity. I am not a visual artist by background, so there's a little bit of a winding road to how we ended up here. I graduated from college with a degree in theater as an actor. So I've been performing since I was a little kid. I was in a touring Shakespeare troupe when I was in high school. And when I was in college, I didn't come from a family with money. So while I was in college, I was thinking, what am I going to do with this degree when I finish college? Like, how am I going to support myself? And I don't have family to fall back on. And so I was the weirdo kid in college who, while everybody was, hanging out on the couch, I was reading books about finance and interviewing, like talking to business owners and stuff, trying to figure out how to make a living. And when I finished college, I had produced a few shows and I had started doing some marketing to get people out to the student shows that I was producing. And so I had started getting into business. And then my first full-time post-college job was working for a marketing agency. And I was really into the internet. And I decided, gosh, I'll take these skills that I'm learning from my day job and start writing a blog about how to use those skills to sell creative work online. And in 2009, that was pretty early on. And there were not a lot of people doing that at the time. And it just kind of organically grew from me sharing some of the skills that I was learning to interviewing artists who were doing all kinds of work, into leaning more and more into the visual arts. Those were the people that were responding to the early blog, and people started asking me to teach classes and consult, and it just kind of grew from there. And in 2016, I published How to Sell Your Art Online, and we've worked with something like 7,000 or 8,000 artists who've come through our program all over the world, from Australia to the United States and a whole bunch of countries in between. And it's been really fun to work with artists and help them figure out how to make a living from their work, whether or not they want to make a living from their work. One of the really surprising and I think really gratifying things that I've discovered is that a lot of artists who feel like they should be making a living from their work discover, like that's not what they want to do. It's not fulfilling for them. The sales and business side of it is not something that they're really interested in, and they don't need to. So there's been a lot of conversations about how our program helps artists actually clarify whether or not they really want to do the work that it takes to sell their work and to make a living from selling their work. So, up to fast forward to now, and I run The Abundant Artist, and I've become a bit of a serial thing starter, and I'm helping a friend launch a tech product now, and running The Abundant Artist is one of the things I do, and I really love doing it.
Wow, well, it shows. I mean, you've become such a guiding light for so many artists. And I think you have a really good point about being able to help people discern if they're really interested in being a professional artist. It took me a number of years to be ready for that. And there are a bunch of factors that influenced my decision.
Mhm.
But like you, well, I started out with an art degree and I've been making art forever. But like you, I started out in marketing as far as a paycheck. And it was cutthroat. I mean, there were days where there was screaming, but I did come to find that wherever I was, I learned a lot, and I could apply it to my career to help me to actually, if I decided to step in from a business point of view, make that leap without just throwing myself out of the plane and hoping that the parachute would appear, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
So I get you. I completely get you. And agencies aren't all bad. That was just one that was like my second agency job. And I just thought, I don't know if this is for me, but I think it's important to be able to discern what you want to do with your career and what your boundaries are, especially as an artist, where those things may bother you more than someone else. You know, I decided I'm a self-driven person. I don't need to be yelled at to perform. So it helped me to learn to really draw my own boundaries. So you've said that making as an artist is not a mystery. It's about having a mindset of success, understanding the basic principles of business, and taking daily actions towards your goals. Can you give us an idea of some of the principles that we would need to understand in a basic sense to do this with regard to business and how to take small steps towards our goals?
Sure. I think for a lot of artists, when they first come to the Abundant Artist and our programs, they're still figuring out, what does it actually mean to sell your work? What does it mean to build the business of the discipline of building a business? So early on, it's figuring out, what is it that you actually like to make? What is it that you actually have to say as an artist? For some artists, they just want to dabble, and there's nothing wrong with that. You just want to make whatever you feel like making in any particular day. You change styles frequently. You don't have any particular subject that you are passionate about, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, having art as a form of self-expression is a wonderful thing. However, when it comes to selling art and having significant success, 9 out of 10 artists who do that have a particular point of view. They have a subject matter that they care about a lot. They have a message that they want to convey. They have a thing that they want to do. And it's funny because yesterday, an artist that I've been friends with for a long time just announced that she booked a solo show for the second quarter of 2022. And she's somebody who's gone back and forth a lot between different styles, and she's gone in and out of being an artist versus doing other work. And I commented on her post and said, "Hey, congratulations on the solo show." And she responded right away and said, "Years ago, Cory, you told me that I needed to lean into, like, to pick a lane," is the way that she phrased it. And I resisted back then. And you were totally right. I needed to pick a lane. And, long story short, once she decided what her message actually was and what the thing was that she was passionate about and that she was willing to make a lot of art about, that was when she started landing solo shows and having some success as an artist. So it's figuring out what you want to do, and then figuring out how to tell the story of your work in a cohesive, compelling way.
I think you've hit upon something really crucial, because I get asked that a lot, is how do I find my voice? How do I find my voice? Right. So especially for people who need to generate a lot of art, that would be people who want to get solo shows where they have to have some form of cohesive body of work. And for people who want to be able to market their work, they're going to have more success where they focus on a body of work, perhaps per gallery they approach, or to certain collectors, so that they, like, as you said, find a lane. I think that's a brilliant way to guide them. Is you're going to have longevity in production. So find out, really dig deep and figure out what lights your fire, because you're going to have to keep going. The people that succeed have that longevity. They keep producing.
Yeah.
And that's not self-indulgent. I used to think it was self-indulgent and think, oh, well, I'll paint animals. Oh, that's just me having fun. That's the point.
Quite often it is the thing that you can do forever, that, like, whatever, if your friends know that like you're at a party or you're out drinking together and you start talking about something and there's a topic that you talk about over and over again and can't stop talking about it. And if you start talking about it, your friends all go, oh boy, here we go again. Like that's probably the thing that is going to be the thing you're known for as an artist, right? Like I, as a performing artist myself, it's Shakespeare. And if I've done probably most of Shakespeare's canon. There's about 5 or 6 plays that I have not been in yet, and I, studied a lot in college. And a few years ago, some new friends that my wife and I made the mistake of asking my wife and I about Shakespeare, and we started talking, and an entire hour went by before we realized, oh my gosh, we've been talking for an hour straight about Shakespeare. Maybe we should stop and talk about something else. And if there's a thing like that for you, then it's worth exploring as an avenue for you to make it as an artist.
That's brilliant. I'm so glad that you brought this point forward, because I think a lot of my listeners right now are going, oh, because it's kind of easy to think about what lights your fire as opposed to what are the trends? What are people looking for? What am I supposed to produce? You know what? Focus on producing what lights your fire, because you got to keep producing.
Yeah, I was listening earlier this week. There's this great new podcast called 60 Songs That Explain the 90s. And I went to high school in the 90s, so I'm a big fan of 90s music. And they were talking about the song Smooth by Carlos Santana and Rob Thomas. And they talked about how Santana had his big breakout when he played at Woodstock in 1969. He was 20 or 22 or something like that at the time. And his first 3 albums were huge hits. But he had a very clear vision of who he is as an artist. And a few years into his career, he kept doing the thing that he really loved doing. And trends went away from the kind of music that Santana was playing. And then he kind of went into obscurity. Like he had a really strong core following, and he had the hits, and they would tour and play concerts. And he released like 10 albums that not a lot of people paid attention to. And then in 1999, so 30 years later, Santana was still doing the thing that he loved doing. And he was very true to who he was as an artist. And there's some great interviews of him talking about like his music. He would download things from Angels, and that would be the music that he would come out and how he would make choices about his songs. And lo and behold, come around 1999, he has this new direction that he wants to go in that's still true to who he is as an artist. And Smooth became this massive, massive hit. And it like he just did what he did, and the market came around to him. But it 30 years later. So it takes a lot of discipline and patience to have that kind of success. And he was lucky enough to have some success early on, but it was really, really fascinating to me to see somebody stay true to who they are as an artist for that long.
Yeah, definitely. And that's interesting. You said he downloaded his ideas from Angels. I assume you're not talking about baseball.
I am not talking about the baseball team. If you find like there's an article, I think it's in Rolling Stone, called "An Oral History of Smooth," and he gets into talking about his interactions with angels and his meditation and spiritual practice, and how that intersects with the music that he makes. And sort of Flora Bowley, who's an intuitive painter, is a great example of how that works in painting. She does a lot of really interesting things with painting from her heart and from spiritual places, and find her to be a really interesting artist in that respect.
Yeah, I really get that, and I resonate with it. I meditate a lot, and I am working to channel some of my intuitive visions the same way, to really let them guide me, even if the work is realistic in nature or representational, that it incorporates my intuition and my ideas of, visions I've had while meditating. So I do find that to be an interesting outlet and a source of inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, regarding taking a tack here differently towards pricing, you've said, because I think this is very helpful, and I think it definitely would benefit our listeners to be explained a little bit. You have said, learn to separate the creation of your art from the selling of your art.
Mhm.
I love this. Can you explain a little bit how artists can separate these two things in order to charge enough for their work?
Sure. So I think the creation of the work, you have to put out of your mind like commercial considerations, right? You have to think about how can you bring the greatest skill and the greatest passion to the work. And then once you've made the work, then you start considering, okay, how do I find an audience for the work that I want to make? And how do I reach those people with a story that is interesting and compelling? So I say that, and I've oversimplified it to a certain degree, because I think that there are some commercial considerations to be made when you're deciding what work to make. If you're deciding, I'm just going to like paint swear words on the side of a building, I don't know, I'm just making stuff up. There's just not very many people who are going to pay you to do that. But I have seen artists who I thought would be unlikely to sell very much, who have turned into big time bestsellers, right? And that ranges anywhere from, people putting a giant shark in a tank of formaldehyde and selling it for $12 million, all the way through to, artists making variations of Klimt's trees and selling those online. Like there's just so many niches and so many subgenres of art that you can make, that I think for the most part, most artists would be better served by making the thing that they want to make rather than trying to time a trend or put the commercial consideration first.
That's interesting. And see, I think I misunderstood some of what you said in the book regarding this, in the sense that I was thinking you were talking about, and I know this is also very important, learning to separate what it took mechanically and production wise to make the art versus the ethereal component of the art and the value of the art from an ethereal perspective that can't be grasped and put into a spreadsheet.
Yeah, I think that's true too. You do have to separate your emotional attachment to your work from the pricing and the marketing and sort of the market forces that surround your work. It is normal for artists to be misunderstood, misinterpreted, to have the meaning of the work twisted or reinterpreted during the business and marketing process, right? Some artists are very good at taking control of their narrative and saying, no, this is who my work is for. This is who my intended audience is. This is what I want my work to say. And they're very skilled at guiding the market to speak about those things. And that's generally because they're good at talking to journalists and curators and their fans directly about what their work is and what it means. And some artists don't want to do that. Some artists just want to make the work and put it out in the market and let the market do whatever they want with it. And both are perfectly valid approaches, but you have to decide for yourself whether or not you're willing to do the work or interested in doing the work of making the market, or if you're just going to let the market decide what your work means for itself.
I think that's a good point. And it dovetails with another one of my questions, which related to the video component of selling your art. I just spoke to Marcus Sheridan about this, and he was saying something similar to what I've heard you say, which has to do with get in there and talk to your fans, talk to your audience about what the work means to you and connect with them and let them in to some degree. I suppose you mean to the degree that you feel you're not compromising your own vision and concept of how much of it you should share.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that that is a really interesting way to go, because I also had heard from many artists in the past and authorities on art that would say, oh, you can't explain your art, like it was taboo to kind of help the viewer along. And I disagree, but I do think there has to be a point at which you don't over explain to the point where they are excluded from the narrative. They need to be able to insert
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. And I can think of several examples of artists who have stepped on the narrative of their own work to the degree that it turns people off. But there is a balance of saying, I need to protect my creative process where I'm not letting people in when it's still early and it's still developing, and you know, any sort of criticism or feedback can influence or injure the creative process, whatever that looks like for you. So there is an element of, I need to protect this process while it's still developing. But then once you know what you're doing and once you have a clear idea of who you are as an artist, then it's time to start taking some of those work in progress shots, some of those videos or other things that you might have done, and releasing those into the wild to say, well, here's what I was experiencing, here's what I was meaning, here's what I was doing when I created this work, right? And here's what I want this work to mean.
Yeah, and I think I don't think, you know, we've been talking about the discerning the line between over explaining and inviting the viewer into the narrative and letting them in on it, that there's anything wrong with telling them what inspired you.
Mm-hmm.
And the references that came to mind for me, a lot of my work, a lot of my paintings are inspired by music.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be anything. I mean, it could be Lindsey Sterling, or
Mm-hmm.
it could be Five Finger Death Punch. It's very eclectic, and I just load my Pandora station and let her rip. So it will trigger things in my head that mean something to me, or memories or things I'm struggling with. And it somehow all gets poured out onto the canvas. So I can talk about, you know, I was listening to this music and it really brought to mind this situation. And I think other people can resonate with that, unless you say, you know, this is Joe Schmo and this is what this person's doing, and getting real granular. So I am curious about boundaries and pricing.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about galleries. We've talked about basically setting parameters around not taking your pricing too personally. How can artists, I know a lot of the wisdom says you can raise your prices, but you shouldn't lower them, because if you discount your art, you're sending a message and you're insulting or upsetting your previous buyers.
Mm-hmm.
How can artists draw boundaries, especially if they take commissions, when people have access to them and they're not working with galleries, so that they can hold firm on those prices?
I think you have to just be intentional about what your prices are, and only increase them when it is really clear that it's time to increase them. And I think there's a couple of good indicators. My friend Melissa Dinwiddie, who we used to do a lot of things with, she explained increasing your prices as an artist as when you start to feel resentment about the work you're making at the price you're making it. That's usually a pretty good indicator that it's time to raise your prices. And let me explain a little more. If you are doing commissions and you say this piece is going to be $1,000, and the person says, okay, great, and you feel disappointed and you feel like, well, okay, they said yes, but I don't feel like I'm not excited about doing that, and I feel like I'm still not getting what I'm worth, then it's probably past time to increase your prices. And at that point, it's probably time to reach out to your collectors and say, hey, you know, next month or in a couple months, my prices are going up by X amount. That's a really good indicator. And there's other ways you can look at it. You can look and see similar artists whose work is similar quality to yours. What are they selling at? What price range are they selling at? Who are there? And you have to take into account things like who their collectors are. what they're, whether or not they just have a much bigger following than you. There's a few other factors. But I think the resentment piece is usually a pretty good indicator.
I think that that's really a good point, because if we're honest, most of us, if we're paying attention and we start training ourselves to really be mindful and check in with how we're feeling when we're upset, we can pretty clearly know the emotion of resentment. It's definitely a flare of anger or frustration where you just kind of constrict and you go, oh. So that's a really good barometer. Thank you for that. I'm going to use that one myself.
Yeah, and it's good to practice things like delaying making decisions when you're talking to gallery owners or maybe a really important collector. And if they're encouraging you or pressuring you to raise your prices or to lower your prices, I will almost always encourage artists to say, you know what, don't make a decision in that moment. If you feel pressured, if you feel bad at all about the situation, tell the person that you're going to think about it and to give you 24 or 48 hours, whatever works for you. And then go and sit and get yourself in a good mental space where you're feeling good and feeling happy, and then make a decision from there, because that's usually going to be a decision that you'll be happier with in the long run, rather than allowing somebody to pressure you into a decision that isn't necessarily in your best interest.
Yeah, that makes a tremendous amount of sense. And I do that too. And I tend to tell my kids the same thing, is sleep on it. The next day, if you're going to have buyer's remorse or seller's remorse and you go, oh, what did I do? And you find that you're frustrated and, really in a down mood the next day, chances are you might have agreed to something too quickly that did not resonate with you and your standards and what you need for your own integrity. So these days, it's easy when you see artists selling their work online, so many artists out there online, to believe that we don't need galleries anymore at all. Can you talk about how galleries are still very relevant and how artists who want to get their work into them will have the best shot at doing so?
Sure. Yeah. So the latest report that I'm aware of from Hiscox, the insurance company, said that there were about 6,000 galleries in North America. However, that was pre-COVID, and we had total retail devastation over 2020 and 2021. The United States already had more retail square footage per capita than any other country in the world. We have a lot of money here. We're a quite wealthy country, so we buy a lot of stuff. But over the last 18 months, that has changed quite a bit. So what has happened is a lot of the galleries that were run by people who don't know how to run a business have gone away. A lot of the galleries that were hobby projects have gone away. And what we're left with is galleries that have collectors who are immune to economic changes, i.e. very wealthy collectors. Those galleries weathered the storm. They may have made some cuts, they may have cut back on expenses, but those galleries will be fine. If you are in one of those galleries or have an opportunity to get into one of those galleries, then you may not even be listening to this podcast, because you're probably not thinking about how to sell your art, because that gallery is probably doing it for you. However, there's always a new gallery. There's always somebody who wants to start another gallery, whether it's an artist or somebody who's just really into art and thinks that they know how to sell. And so if you can find a gallery that has a trained sales staff or a talented sales staff that knows their stuff when it comes to art, and they know how to find and develop an audience of collectors, then that gallery can be really valuable to you. Most of the artists that we work with who are making a great living from their work spend about half of their time on the business side of their art. Right. So working with a gallery can take some of that pressure off, although maybe not as much as artists would like to take off, because even if you have a gallery, you're still going to be dealing with shipping. You're still going to be dealing with gallery openings and travel and other logistical things that may or may not be directly related to sales, but you're still going to have to be dealing with those things. So you're still going to be spending, at least 20-30% of your time dealing with the non-art making aspect of being an artist, right? But a good gallery run by a good staff who knows how to sell and develop relationships over time can take a tremendous amount of pressure off of an artist's career. But those galleries are exceedingly rare and usually have a waiting list of over a year before they'll even look at your portfolio or consider you for a group show.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. Thank you for that clarification, though, because I do think that a lot of people are wondering, where do I put my focus? How important is it to even pursue galleries anymore? And naturally, starting to feel the pressure, if they haven't already made a move, to move their art online. Mm-hmm. Which brings me to a question about in your book, How to Sell Your Art Online, on page 93. You are talking about self-hosting versus artist website services.
Sure.
Can you touch on the difference and what are the factors that artists should consider when deciding which way to go for their website?
Yeah. So it's funny because this section of the book is one of the things that's probably changed the most since we published, because website hosting and website tools have changed tremendously in 5 years. 5 years ago, I was much more likely to recommend to an artist that they self-host on WordPress. But at this point, unless you're really into tech and playing with tech tools, there's not any reason to self-host. Something like Squarespace or Fine Art Studios Online or Art Storefronts or Shopify, any of those are going to give you a great website right out the gate that you don't have to really know anything about in order to run it. And you don't have to play around with updating plugins and security problems and all that stuff. It's just easier to use one of those services. And those are the 4 that I recommend. But if you're really into tech tools, you don't need my recommendations on what to use for self-hosting. If you really love that stuff, you're already doing it, and you probably don't need my advice on it.
Thank you for that, because I, as my own agency life evolved, I got way deep into web design and multimedia. So I do that stuff myself, but there are times where I will look at Fine Art Studios Online and wonder if I'm in the right place. The one thing as a podcaster that I don't like about the websites that are hosted by certain other companies is access to the artist. And it depends on the company, where if I'm trying to reach somebody and they're on someone else's site that will put their pictures up for them, give them a standard page, you can't always reach the artist without going through the organization. And so I'm not sure if that's a good thing. I guess it depends on if they're, as you mentioned, a gallery that's going to take care of sales for you.
Yeah, I think every artist, there's no reason at all to let some other organization control your web presence. So every artist should have, their name, yourname.com or yournameartist.com or something like that, where people can reach out and contact you directly. That's super inexpensive. And there's even free options for something like that. Not for the domain name, but for the website. But if you are an artist who, you only sell your work through galleries, then, yourname.com can just be a portfolio of some of your best work, and then a page that says, if you want to buy any of my work, contact this gallery. But for any other questions or inquiries, contact me directly. You should always be reachable by some segment of your audience base, because I can't tell you how many times over the years an artist has come to me and said, my gallery went out of business, the gallery owner died, some other thing happened to my gallery, and now I have nothing because I have no way of contacting any of the people in my collector base, and they don't know who I am. So that relationship has changed quite a bit over the years, and I think that a lot of artists are in more direct contact with their collectors, but there should be a way online for people to reach you.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and something to consider when you're thinking about the structure and contact setup of your information with regard to a website is accessibility directly to potential buyers, even if you're going to route them to a gallery so that they can actually get to you and communicate and build that relationship, because then they're going to build their attachment to you. I think the more that they can actually, oh my gosh, I talked to this artist, and you become even more magical.
Yep, absolutely.
So, Cory, regarding making transitions, if people do want to get into a living with their art, we know that if we don't take enough time to create our art, we won't be able to make that leap to a profitable career. But then it's also true that those of us who still are transitioning can't just walk away, or we would have already done so, because we're going to be so concerned about the financial devastation that we're going to wreak on our families before we can get up and running, that we won't be able to create. At least that's me. I definitely love security. And I would love for you to give some ideas on the best ways to scale back on a day gig in order to make time for art without shooting yourself right in the foot.
Sure. So starting an art career is just having a second job, right? So if you're working a 60+ hour a week job, you probably don't have time to start an art business. However, if you are in a job where you can establish some clear boundaries, I start work at 8, I end work at 5, then the next thing to do is to start talking to your family. I have a close friend who is in this transition phase right now where he has a full-time day job, and he's a very talented illustrator, and he's getting involved in the fan art convention circuit, doing some pieces there. Steve Graurock is his name, if anybody wants to check him out. And he's working with his family, where he's going to have a certain amount of time each week, usually like one night a week, where it's dad's time to make art and work on his art business. And his wife and the kids all know that during that time, it's dad's time and I don't bother him. Right. And so he just puts in the work every week at that time. And then wherever else he can fit it in if he wants, but he at least has that guarded and protected time, and he treats it like a second job. And that's kind of what you have to do at the beginning, is just set out that regular time. And I usually tell people, 10 hours a week to get started, one night a week, and then a couple of hours here and there on other days. What I did when I was leaving my day job was it was Tuesday nights after dinner and Saturday mornings, just get up and then work until noon or 1. And that was what I did for the first year or so that I was starting, that I was working on side projects before I quit my job, is just work on that until you can build some momentum.
I think that's a really good point. And I like the idea of designating, especially the evening hours, because I've already dialed back my side work for my clients. But if I'm not careful, I'll tend to work till 6 or 7 in the evening and just exhaust myself trying to make room for the rest of the week. But what ends up happening if I don't have the weekends I know are for my business, Fridays are for my business. I will be reclaiming Thursdays shortly, but I need to have those boundaries and also the expectation in my head ahead of time, because if I've overdone it, or I just haven't set up an expectation that I will work on a particular evening, but maybe I need to, it can be hard to get myself into the studio, because I might start to feel like I just can't. I don't have the momentum to go from the day job to the studio job. So that expectation of this is what we do on Tuesday nights, that's a really good point.
Yeah, you want to take the decision making out of it.
Yes.
So you show up and you do the work, and even if the work sucks, like you at least did the work. And that's true of all habit building, right? Like it's true for how you eat, it's true for how you exercise. I go to the gym Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday mornings at 6 o'clock. It doesn't matter. I just go. And some days I have a great workout and some days I have a terrible workout, but I go, and that way I'm always putting in the work.
You're there.
I'm there. Yeah.
Yep. I definitely resonate with that, because in the mornings I work out, and actually I've got my dog trained. Actually, I think the dog has me trained, but I take him out after the workout and he goes on his one long walk to go all the way around the block, and we have a routine. And, in the beginning, he didn't know the routine. So he was just obnoxious because he's very vocal and he whines constantly when he wants something.
Mm-hmm.
And he would sit next to me while I'm on the step machine and be like, his head would be right next to the step. And I'm like, dude, you got to wait till mom's done, right? I have a rule. If ain't nobody bleeding, I don't want to hear from you until I'm done working out and I'm done painting. And now, as soon as he sees me get on the stepper, he gets all excited and he waits patiently until I start putting on, my coat after the workout. But he sees the stages when I move from the stepper to the push-ups and the different progression. He starts to get excited because now he gets it. And sometimes it works with kids, especially podcasting. If I turn off the heat, so it won't interfere with sound, they know mom's recording. And maybe they'll get lethargic enough to be quiet. Sometimes that works. Sometimes. So, Cory, before we wrap up, I'd love for you to tell us just quickly, can you touch on the issue of licensing and who should consider it as an artist?
Yeah, it's a good question. It depends on what kind of work you make as an artist. There's several different ways you can make a living as an artist. Licensing, generally speaking, is for artists who make pattern work or illustrative work that could be seen on, anything from a calendar to a mug to other sort of swag, wallpaper, that kind of stuff. And there are, if you walk through like a Target or something, and you grab any product off the shelf, usually that product was designed by an artist or contains the designs that a company bought from an artist. And that world is a whole other world. So if you're okay with being art directed, if you're okay with turning in some designs and the company saying, okay, that's great, but can you make it black instead of blue? Like, if you're okay with that kind of client relationship service work, then licensing can be really great. And you just walk through Target, find some products that you like and call those companies up and say, hey, who does your designs, and talk to them and say, I've got a portfolio. Here's a link to my portfolio. And if you'd like to buy any of it, then here's my rates. And you kind of go from there. And it's great because you can build up passive income. But if you are the kind of artist who wants to be making large scale original works, and you're not into doing commissions or being art directed, then it may not be a good fit for you.
Thank you. I have a feeling you've been asked that before.
Yes.
That is really helpful because I've wondered about that. Because even Klimt, of course, his work has been all over the place for eons now, but he is more on the real fine art side of it. But I had an umbrella with Klimt's painting on it, and he is more decorative, of course, but it made me think, what applies to this and what doesn't apply to this. So I like your idea of really seeing what's already out there that people are buying in retail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's no hard and fast rules to it. If you go listen to our podcast with Kelly Ray Roberts that we did years ago, she talks about her process and how she does her licensing work. And she's done, a few $1 million in licensing deals. And this stuff really accumulates over time because you collect royalties over time. So the longer you're at it, the more clients you accumulate, the more products you have licensing. And some work that may not be a good fit for licensing now might be a good fit down the road as cultures change and tastes change. And some work that is great for licensing now doesn't work later. But generally speaking, you walk through any large retail store and you'll get a pretty good idea of whether or not your art is a good fit for mass market licensing. That said, there's also niche businesses that some artists are a good fit for. So you walk through Hot Topic or Spencer's or some other more niche store, and you can also find some work there.
Thank you. That's true. And that's another good point. Different stores are going to have different markets and different audiences who are interested in those particular types of designs. So, Cory, before I get to our last question, I want to stop and just thank you profusely for showing up and talking to me and our audience. This is great because they really need to check you out. You've got a fabulous book and an incredible program. And I will be putting links to all of that on your show notes. And I'm just really grateful for you sharing your knowledge this evening. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Caroline. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you reaching out, and it's good to connect with you.
Thank you very much. So I would love for you to wrap us up with your best advice for artists who are serious about making a living through their art.
It is a marathon, not a sprint. Do not put pressure on yourself to say, I'm going to make a living from my work within a year. What I will often tell artists is plan to be doing this for 3 to 5 years and then reevaluate. Right. So whatever pace you're setting for yourself, however intense your work is, plan on doing what you're doing for a while, for 3 to 5 years, so that you can build up an audience, so that you can learn how the game works, so that you can build up a voice and discover your style. But mostly it just takes that long to develop a large enough audience that people know you and want to refer you to their friends. And you've built up your 100 true fans so that you have people that are buying from you when you are ready to quit the day job or whatever you need to do to go full time. But yeah, it's just a matter of planning for the long term rather than putting pressure on yourself to make it happen right now.